The fundamental duty of any state is securing baseline survival goods for its population. When a country cannot guarantee food, energy, and security, the social contract dissolves. Modern food subsidies were born from necessity. By 1918, naval blockades had forced Germany into urban starvation, teaching nations that relying on food imports creates a fatal security flaw. To prevent this, governments developed the subsidy system, a policy that presents state intervention as a gift to the citizenry. In practice, the math is a closed loop. The state extracts taxes from the citizen's left pocket to lower the price of a good, placing that same money back into their right pocket. This process requires a massive bureaucratic machine to route funds from the taxpayer to the producer. Subsidies do not create wealth. They simply obscure the true cost of survival through inefficient bureaucratic routing. Because subsidy funds are finite and distributed through occupations, politicians and bureaucrats function as gatekeepers. When producers must compete for government approval, the system invites corruption, political favoritism, and the selection of arbitrary market winners. Producers often expend more energy lobbying or protesting for these funds than they do innovating to increase their productivity. National security requires a surplus. To guarantee enough food exists during a crisis, states over-subsidize to ensure domestic production exceeds domestic need. This surplus creates a mathematical trap. When subsidized goods are exported, the domestic taxpayer effectively pays to lower the price of food consumed in foreign nations. Standard agricultural and energy subsidies are designed in a way that leaks domestic wealth across borders. Securing national resources requires an architecture that removes the bureaucratic gatekeeper and stops international wealth leakage. Replacing the application process requires shifting to an algorithmic logic, the negative value added tax. This logic applies exclusively to essential survival goods, primary agriculture, green energy infrastructure, and vital research and development. If a farmer produces a baseline good valued at 100 units, the state applies a negative 200% tax rate. Under this system, for every 100 units of production, the farmer receives a 200-unit credit from the state. This brings their total revenue to 300 units, even if the base value is only 100. This state credit is captured directly within the transaction. The producer receives their support as a direct result of the sale, bypassing the need for a government approval office. Applying a negative tax rate perfectly bakes financial support into the market's pricing mechanism, completely without requiring bureaucratic oversight. To see how this remains self-policing, we can track a negatively taxed good as it moves through the economy. A processor buys the good, adds their own value, and applies a standard positive tax to that specific new value. This standard tax process continues at every stage until the product reaches the final retail checkout. When the final consumer purchases the good, the system generates a digital fiscal receipt. This receipt triggers the state treasury to instantly send the negative tax funds back up the chain to the original producer. The security of this system depends on every actor in the chain following the rules. If an actor skips a tax payment, the digital chain breaks. The final receipt fails to validate, and the state payout stops. Because the payout depends on a successful final receipt, every business in the supply chain is incentivized to audit the others. The negative VAT creates a self-regulating ecosystem where corruptible government inspectors are replaced by mathematical self-interest. This algorithmic chain also addresses the export paradox, where domestic taxpayers end up subsidizing foreign consumers. Nations must produce their own essentials to survive pandemics, wars, and supply chain shocks, but they shouldn't pay for other nations' consumption. If a negatively taxed good crosses a national border before reaching a domestic retail checkout, no domestic receipt is generated. As a result, the state never pays out the negative tax. In an indirect export, where a product is processed domestically before being sent abroad, the payout is recovered at the point of exit. The state applies an automatic customs tariff at the border equal to the accumulated negative tax credits. This ensures the foreign consumer pays the true market price, rather than the subsidized rate intended for domestic citizens. This algorithmic wall secures the domestic taxpayer's investment, maintaining survival production without leaking wealth across borders. The old model requires a gatekeeper to distribute funds. The new model relies on production metrics. A negative VAT functions without grant committees, political loyalty tests, or lobbyists. The algorithm rewards actual productivity. Successfully producing a survival good automatically triggers support through the tax code. This mathematical architecture scales beyond agriculture, securing green energy infrastructure and funding vital corporate research and development. The system aligns the state's need for security with the free market's drive for efficiency. Shifting subsidies into algorithmic tax logic secures a nation's vital resources while removing the human gatekeepers prone to corruption. By letting the math do the work, a state can guarantee its own survival.